What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of 1YL or 1 Year Later. My name is Corey, as you know, and this is a podcast show amplifying the voices of people taking adversity into their own hands and changing their world and the world around them. And let me tell you, today I have a world changer, a big thinker, and a great friend of mine. We have the one and only Mark Osis. Mark, how are you, man?
I'm flattered, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for that warm intro, Corey. How's it going?
Absolutely. You know what? It's a good day. It's a little gloomy here in Southern California. Seems as though DC looks a little sunny. How is it?
It's sunny.
Good.
It's definitely sunny. We're experiencing the part of spring where everything gets green at once, which is one of my favorites. I don't know if you know about DC's Cherry Blossom Festival in the spring as well. So we have as much tourism as we've seen in a year going down to see the cherry blossoms just bloom right now. So that's what DC's looking like.
So the cherry blossoms are out to play.
They're out to play. They're honestly past peak. So
oh, wow.
If you didn't get them yet, you might miss them.
You know, I did see the memo, I think on Twitter, that the cherry blossoms came out to play a little bit early this year. Is that true?
Global warming starts them early.
Okay. You know, you're right. You're right. Fires in Southern California and cherry blossoms blossoming a little early in DC.
You see one. It's the day of the week.
Heck yeah. Okay, well, everyone, like I said, Mark is an amazing friend of mine, but you know the show is not about accolades, but I'm going to give you a few to give you some context of where we're coming from. Mark played baseball at George Washington University in DC, grew up in Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia. And as he grew up dreaming of playing one day in the big leagues of Major League Baseball, that dream did not come true, unfortunately. And I'm saying that very bluntly because Mark and I have gotten the opportunity to walk through that journey together. And he has found himself in some really cool spaces since then. Not only did he start a nonprofit back in college, he also worked for a nonprofit out in Southern California for a short stint after he finished college, went back to the East Coast, and he is such an East Coast guy. He's right where he belongs, has found himself in 2 jobs now. And I'm sure he'll tell you a little bit about that while we chat. But nonetheless, he's not, I wouldn't call him like a career employee, a job worker. He's more of like a life doer. He is guiding the path for many people who love him. He is inspiring the path for many people who love him. And the way he does life is really captivating. So I'm excited for him to share some of those things of just so you guys can hear how he processes and hear how he thinks, because that's really how I know him to be. So are you ready to get down to it?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. Okay, Mark, a year ago, you were in Washington, D.C., so I'm going to answer your where were you physically question. But a year ago,
I want to know. North Carolina a year ago.
You're right. Okay, let's get to it. First question is, where were you 1 year ago, physically, emotionally, and spiritually? Paint us a picture of what 365 days ago looked like.
Yeah, so I was living just outside of Washington, D.C., but at this time, what was it, April 12th, 2020, I was in Charlotte, North Carolina. And my girlfriend grew up there. She lives in the DC area now, but because of COVID and work from home, we took a good amount of time to work from her parents' house down in Charlotte, and it was amazing. They have a pool. They had all the sunshine you could ask for, and people still didn't really know how work from home was going to work. We were only a couple weeks in, and some people were still watching Netflix all day and calling it work. It was still that phase of COVID. So
totally.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. I spent most of my days outside, and so physically, I was in Charlotte.
Nice.
Emotionally, I was a lot of things. I think I was really happy to get out of the city, and the first couple weeks of COVID, I had spent in my little studio apartment that was pretty lonely, pretty isolating, and honestly took a toll on me mentally, to the point where I was just scrolling through social media, reading all the early updates of the COVID statistics, and it was getting to me. So getting out of the city was big time. Getting to be with my girlfriend Mariah and her family was incredible. But at the same time, I was working a job that I knew wasn't where I wanted to end up career-wise, and was just starting to feel the sting of businesses not only not hiring, but actually letting some of their employees go, and realizing I might be stuck in a job that I'm not thrilled about for the long haul. So I had that mental side to deal with as well.
Yeah, man, I think, as familiar as that sounds, the craving of the vitamin D sitting by the pool in Charlotte, North Carolina, right? You have the isolating studio apartment with the unknown of what quarantine and lockdown was really going to be like. The job that, without getting too far into it, was kind of hinged on people being hired in a season where people were not being hired. And you just chasing after the desire to do something different, to exercise some other aspects of who you are, what your heart beats for, but also find a career path in it. I would say that there was a little bit of questioning probably at the beginning of quarantine, and probably a little bit of the blues of like, where is April 12th, 13th going to take us in the next coming weeks. I thought this was only supposed to be a 2-week thing. So like next phase of this, like what challenges specifically would you say were you faced with like in this time frame that ended up panning out over the course of a year, or maybe they got harder in the year? Like what challenges come to mind?
Yeah. So the job that I was in was a sales job, and my clientele were mostly hospitality clients. So those were some of the first to go, not belly up, but certainly experienced a lot more hardship for COVID. So the success that I had, what limited success I had in that role was largely taken away, or just negatively affected during that time. And so once I took out the relative success of that part of my portfolio, I started to really feel some of the pangs of the job that I had been dealing with and counteracting with some relative success. So just really recognizing how tough the job circumstance was for me, and then the recognition of I might be stuck for a little while. That was tough. And also just like trying not to feel sorry for myself, but also experiencing that feeling of feeling sorry for myself, and then experiencing the guilt of feeling sorry for myself. You should do better than that. So it was an emotional battle. Just to at times it was great. There was bliss where you would go on a walk in a Charlotte neighborhood and be like, wow, this is very, very pleasant, and just good to get away from the chatter of the cable news. But then there was other times where you had all the news swirling around, the feeling of being stuck and guilty and feeling sorry for yourself. And it was easy to get into a negative cycle, for sure.
For sure. Okay, so just so that we have some landmarks for your last 365 days, you were in a job, but you have since transitioned out of that job. How long have you been in the new job that you now have?
Yeah, so I started the new job in early December of 2020. So from that point in April, it was another 8 months until I actually started working at a different company, which is crazy.
Right. Crazy. I mean, praise God you had a job in that season, right? Like, I think there's a lot to be said for the blessing that is having work last year, when so many people saw the lack thereof. But okay, so December and then April, like there were so many pieces that happened in that time frame, and there's a couple of like lanes that I want to ride down with you and sharing with people. And the place I'm going to start first is like you're in Washington D.C. Now, obviously, we're talking about Charlotte, but living in Washington D.C., you went to school in Washington D.C. You've kind of been around and near, let's just call it what it is, politics or government for quite some time. In this year, like politically minded, like kind of leaving opinions at the door, what did it feel like to be in such a space, like geographically, that had a lot of government and policy and just pieces of the puzzle that were coming out at really different rates during an election? All of these pieces, like, what was it like to just be amongst that environment, and share as much as you would like in terms of any pieces of that puzzle that you found joy in, found hardship in? Did it spike some really interesting conversations? Like, what was that like for you?
Yeah, definitely interesting. I value the perspective that I have living in DC for these last couple of months. I mean, there's no corner of this country that wasn't affected by politics in the last year. And so I think to be at the epicenter of it, you really feel the magnitude of every decision, of every debate, of every social justice movement, and seeing these protests firsthand, and being in the city that gets shown on the news all around the country is very powerful. And it's funny because when I look back, there were so many good conversations that were had about, whether it was one side of the political spectrum or the other side, whether it was one side of an issue within society or another side. But I also remember a lot of negativity that came from that. And I think no one listening to this is going to be surprised by that.
Yeah.
But it's tough to not see, scrolling through tweets and being frustrated, as I look in the rearview mirror, it's tough to not see getting in Instagram DM conversations with people that I haven't talked to since high school. And, all I did was share an opinion, and now I have, other voices coming from the other side. And I think that's good. And I think if you manage it well, it's easy to turn that for good and have a good conversation around it. But far too often, I would say I was narrow-minded, or he was very dogmatic and hard-headed in my views. And sometimes as I look back in the mirror, I would wish to do those conversations differently. But I definitely think being in DC during that time gave me more opportunity to have those conversations just by looking out the window.
For sure. Well, at one point in the last 365 days, I found myself in Baltimore, Maryland, and made a little pit stop in DC to spend some time with you. And, one of the things I remember was, I feel like things that exist for me in Southern California was, there's like not as much of a freedom to have those conversations in Southern California as I felt like there was a freedom to have them peacefully while we were in DC together. Like I remember like stumbling upon some of your friends, seemingly close acquaintances of yours, that like it was just a conversation that was being had on the rooftop, and jumping in and like talking and providing some personal insight into it. It was never an attack, and it was truly like a peaceful discussion where everyone could leave in a way that we could nod our heads and say like, hey, respect to have an opinion, respect to have some sort of research done. Do you feel like the city as a whole has operated that way, or are there still some like isolating conversations that do exist, or polarizing conversation that do exist, just given the nature of the political conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a couple of things come to mind. First is a lot of people choose to live in DC specifically because they're interested in politics and these issues. So they want to talk about it more because it's a passion of theirs, and that's part of the reason why they moved here. And with that, there's a clearer line drawn of who stands where on which issues, and that context helps you to enter into a conversation with more comfort versus when you don't know if somebody is going to be offended or is going to take your opinion and spin it on you immediately, entering into a conversation. So I think those are two things that come to mind. And also just living here in DC, it's a part of the lifestyle. So you learn your talking points early on, and you continue to refine them as you go. And as you learn, I mean, my talking points have changed a lot in the last 7 years, but I've definitely, had to have them ready to go from the jump.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I just remember one of the pieces of my last year was, some dates come to mind. January 6th was a date that I shot you a text saying, hey, are you all good? Yeah. Election day was a time period where I shot you a text just so that like, hey, are you staying home tonight? And like the other times was like June, right? We had the racial injustice conversations and protests and things happening right down the street from you, and just kind of shooting you a text being like, hey, be careful, but like proud of you for raising your voice and things of that sort. That, when you were talking about just the nature of being in DC, those are definitely things, but also being your friend, there's also pieces of that puzzle that like, that's not happening in Foothill Ranch, California, but it's like, it's it's cool to know that there's safe space to be able to still have those conversations and know that like Washington D.C. is an inhabitable city with real people who are doing real things. It's not just like, you know, suited up politicians like on every street corner, and then everyone else lives in the actual like mainland Maryland, Virginia, outside of the borders, right?
Oh.
But I think it was definitely a part of your year that I remember having some cool, passionate conversations about things that we had never talked about. And so I'm gonna head in a direction right now. You know, the last episode that we had was one of my very dear best friends, Aris, who we talked about her perspective as it pertained to racial injustice. And you know, it's been cool to have open dialogue with her because she is a Black small business owner. She does floral design for weddings. She had a lot of like interesting corners that she had to dodge last year.
Yeah.
But one thing that has been really cool is just the fact that our consistency of friendship has led to a complete understanding that we can have open dialogue and open conversations. And whether I have done things that are microaggressions, I'll call them, in the past, we can talk them out and we can have a peaceful dialogue about it. So would you mind sharing just kind of top of mind, high level, where your heart was at amidst the racial injustice conversation back in June, or any developments that have happened since then? Obviously, it's in the news today.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because it is very much in the news today. Growing up in elementary school at recess, I would play basketball with 2 Black kids. And in college, 3 of my roommates senior year were Black. And I feel like I have had friends who were Black or other minorities throughout my entire life, and just have consistently seen them not treated in the same way that I have been. And I realize I have privilege, right? I have every privilege in the book. I'm a straight white Christian male from a good family who has 2 parents, and they both love me. And like I have a ridiculous amount of privilege. And so I view it as my responsibility to leverage that privilege for somebody else who doesn't have it. I don't think that having privilege serves a purpose outside of how you use it. If you use it to self-aggrandize and to self-promote and to find yourself up the ranks in the world, like there's a part of us that's going to do that. But if you can't bring others with you and you can't completely drop everything when the time comes to make a stand for something that matters, then your privilege is wasted. So in recognition of that, and specifically after the incident with George Floyd and just how the country responded to that, I was really inspired and wanted to get involved. So I found myself, and keep in mind, this is during COVID times as well, as everyone knows. So I had been really cooped up pre the summertime, not wanting to expose myself and not wanting to give up my ability to go travel and see older folks or Mariah's family, and decided to go to those to the protests that were happening in DC, and they were right outside the White House. And just being a white person going to those protests, I didn't know what to expect. If I was going to be out of place or if I was going to have a role, and quickly found that the support that I was offering was well received, and that I did have a role, and just my presence being there furthered ever so slightly furthered the mission that was being led through that protest. And there was one night in particular, it was raining outside the White House. There was a group of people right in front of the church right there, and the chant was "No justice, no peace, no justice, no peace." And an individual with the microphone or megaphone came up to the front and just told a story about her personal experience and trauma with racial profiling and discrimination. And it was really powerful. And everyone that was there had taken a knee to listen to her give her speech. And at the end of it, she said, back when Martin Luther King had led the civil rights protests, they didn't just stand around, they marched. You guys want to march tonight? And we all jumped off our knee and we're like, yeah, we want to march tonight. So we marched from the White House up to a different street and wound up taking ourselves all the way down towards the Capitol, walking down Pennsylvania Ave towards the Capitol. And we had the police clearing a way for us at that point because our group was so large and they needed to block traffic. And we were eventually told that we weren't going to make it all the way to the Capitol. They didn't want to see anything bad happen at the Capitol. But we wound up laying down on the ground for 9 minutes in just remembrance of the way that George Floyd was treated by the police officer. And I give you this story to share my heart a little bit about this. And Corey, you know this more than most, but it's just wrong. Like there's good ways to talk about it, bad ways to talk about it, and those can be debated and discussed. And there's the right way to approach a topic like this, and there's wanting to not step on any eggshells through this conversation. But at the end of the day, it's an issue of right and wrong, and the racial discrimination that we have, the minority discrimination across the board that we have, it is just wrong. And so I felt the need to stand up and say something about that, and have been as active in these groups as I can be ever since.
Yeah, man. I mean, I remember the Instagram TV that you posted standing in front of the Capitol. Yeah. And it was just a passionate, I'm gonna call it spoken word. It was passionate words that just encapsulated the emotion that you were feeling personally. And for some that might not know you, it could have sounded aggressive and really out there. But for those of us that understand your heart and where you're coming from, especially in a time frame as was such, where people's hearts were opening up like I had never seen before. I was deeply inspired by that. But all of the moments that I have seen that you have chosen to stand up for in whatever global issue we're speaking about, like the two words advocate and activist like come to mind in terms of the way that you lead your life to continue to keep inspiring others to not necessarily need to be an activist, but to be able to stand up and create their own personal voice and their own personal story surrounding their thoughts on topics such as these. Because I think one of the things you and I have talked about is that the nature that we have watched unfold is you and I too, amongst many of our friends, like we just hadn't talked about it enough. We had talked about it. We knew that there was injustices happening in many communities that we have seen unfold in terrible ways last year, but our activism came out in a way of saying like, we're done. We want to raise our voice. We want to make it known that we are advocates standing with our brothers and sisters who have felt the profiling that has existed, that has felt the injustices that has existed. And we were able to show that in really various ways, whether that we took to social media, whether that means we took to attending a protest, whether that means we had personal phone calls with close friends to just like regroup and ask the hard questions. It was something that I think that it was an opportunity that I watched you take into your own hands and just say like, hey, I don't ever want to be known as someone who didn't do enough. And you surely continue to do that. And it's so inspiring to watch. So, okay, I'm going to turn the corner because I think that we have a good avenue to run down now. I want to know 2 turning points of the last year that got you to now April 12th, 2021. What were 2 turning points that kind of took those challenges you were facing last year in your heart also like physically, that then brought you a little bit of hope to get you to this year, to this today, where we get to talk now, and you have a little bit of a different space emotionally, physically, spiritually, where you're at.
Yeah. So the first one I've already touched on, which was getting a new job. And through that interview process, it was extremely stressful because I realized I finally had my shot. And so in the words of Alexander Hamilton, I didn't want to throw away my shot.
Thank you. Honestly, I appreciate it.
Yeah. So that was a stressful time, and I was doing everything I could to prepare for the interviews to get the job opportunity, which, spoiler alert, it ended up happening.
You did it.
But I think, we spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week doing a job. That's a significant part of our life. And so I have to hit that as one of my 2 moments. The second moment happened in January of this year. I sat down to coffee with a friend of mine who I've known for about 5 years. And she is one of the wisest people that I know. And her name's Jolie. And she's just a great friend, a dear, dear friend. And we grabbed coffee maybe 4 times ever. And after every single time we've grabbed coffee, some cataclysmic event in our lives has happened. And so now every time we go to grab coffee, there's this expectation that, the output is going to be, incredible. And this time was no exception. We grabbed coffee. You can probably see it out my window there, very, very close by. And we just talked about what our spiritual disciplines look like, and, how we make the most of our time, and who we choose to invest in, and where we give our attention, to pay attention to what we pay attention to say it in a pithy way. And from that conversation, I recognized that I wasn't being very spiritually disciplined. And since that conversation, I've had the chance to read the Bible every single morning. And as a Christian, that has just been huge for my personal growth and development and my walk with the Lord. And I've just seen a dramatic change between having a new job starting around the same time, and then also being consistently back in the Word and bringing that to my community. I've just seen a radical change in my demeanor, in my emotional state, in the energy levels that I have, where I'm not just completely tired at 3 p.m. Like I used to be, and it's been huge. So those are 2 big turning points.
I love that. I think it's hard when you are in the midst of a challenge to allow yourself to actually believe that you could be on the other side of that challenge. Like, I think there's one side of that story that says, like, will I ever get out of this hole? But then there's the other side of the story that I think I've always known you to be, and that's, I know I'll get out of this hole. It's just a matter of when. And it's putting into place some of those pieces of the puzzle that are going to help you, like, climb the mountain out of that hole.
Yeah.
Well, I think for you, like, what I'm hearing is that community was a huge piece of that, and making sure that there was conversations that were needing to be had to help you process. I think that's a huge part of last year that a lot of people understood. So they've developed a more healthy view of how to process, who they're giving the microphone to in their life to speak life into some of those spaces, to make sure that we're not, spreading ourselves too thin and pouring value into spaces that are not necessarily the right spaces to be listening from. And I hear that in your story, right? There was a lot of space for people to recognize your unhappiness in your past career. There was a lot of space for people to recognize that there needed to be a little bit of a shift in your routine, your daily routine, in order to make sure that you were starting off on the right foot, so that 3 o'clock slump didn't come. But then you would all of a sudden have this re-energizing at 6 p.m. where work ends and you still have the desire to pour into other people the way that you do so well. And it's been cool to watch those 2 turning points in your life completely kind of develop truly. And as they develop, you are holding your chin a little bit higher, and you're like, so much more open to opportunities that come at a time frame in your day that like 12 months ago, like they were like, absolutely not. Like, this is when I'm shutting down and I'm sitting on my couch and like you're gonna find me watching Netflix out of having a large pizza.
That's true. And not
So
responding to text. Like it was a dark place, man.
yeah.
The two things I'll say to that real quick
Yeah,
is
go.
it number one, it doesn't take much to completely flip things for you. And number two, you never know when it's going to come.
Yeah.
And so for both of those instances, right, I had been applying to jobs for literally 10 months. And then for whatever reason, one application got a response. You never know when it's going to happen. And it was just a response. And then for the other one, all I did was grab coffee with a friend. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know she was going to text me and say, hey, what are you doing Tuesday morning? Grab coffee. But she did. And it didn't take much but an hour of our time and a good cup of Joe. But it's completely changed. I mean, those two things have been completely, life-changing.
Totally. Oh, it's so good to hear. I love it. I love it. I really feel like we've only scratched the surface of like some of the deep retrospective pieces of your last 365 days, but we'll spare everyone we'll spare everyone and like keep it to this right around a half hour podcast episode. But Mark, while we finish up, I want to ask you the thought-provoking question that I like to ask every guest that comes on the 1YL show. You can take a second if you need to think about it, but I want to know, did your 1 year ago self believe that you could be here 1 year later?
Yes. Yeah, I absolutely think so. And you mentioned this earlier, being optimistic and always believing that you can get out of the pit versus giving up and thinking that you're too far down. There were definitely times where I had momentary hesitation of is this too much? Is it never going to end? But for the most part, I knew that I was going to, see better days, and I knew that we were going to turn in a positive direction. The thing that got me sad was how much it was going to cost me to get to that place of joy and freedom. It was going to cost me a lot of pride and ego to admit where I was coming up short to make, adjustments that I needed to make. It was going to cost me a lot of time and energy spent on job search and a lot of, in the meantime, while I was in a job that I didn't love, a lot of effort to make the most of it and bring my best self to work, even at a job that I didn't love, and appreciate the people who chose to invest in me in that time when I didn't see it as a long-term investment. Right. And just care for people well. That, it takes a lot to go from point A to point B sometimes. But I think you hit it with my mindset. It's going to happen, right? It's bound to happen. So, yes, I did.
I love that.
A year ago, I would be here.
I love that. Well, keep up that perspective, man. I think it's so inspiring, and I know many people will be encouraged by just the journey that you took the last year. I think a lot of people come to grips every year someone comes to grips with the fact that the job they're in isn't the job they're supposed to be in for the next season. And that process of patience, I hear 10 months of job applications, like there's a lot of patience in that story. I hear the end result of the job that you were in to the job you landed in, like came with a lot of your new job allows you to exercise some pieces of your heart that you weren't able to exercise before. But that was just in the season you were in, you needed a job, and now you get a job that also envelops some of your passions, to be able to, wake up every morning knowing that you get to tap into all of those pieces of your heart, I think are super cool. But man, it's so cool to hear your retrospective view on where this last year has taken you, and I'm super proud of the way that you led the last 365, and I know that the next year is going to continue to guide you into some spaces that will be very inspiring for people to watch you and how your story unfolds. So man, keep it up.
Absolutely, dude. I appreciate you, brother. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for the kind words. Hopefully, it is a mutual feeling between us.
course, of course. Okay, I'm gonna finish this one out by telling everyone to go and follow Mark's Minute on Instagram because it's one of my favorite things to wake up to in the morning. Since I'm in California, Mark's in DC, I wake up to a video that he posts on Instagram on the username Mark's Minute. And he just provides some cool perspective to jumpstart your day with. And quite honestly, every day I usually fall in line with needing to hear what he has to say. So go ahead and throw that one a follow because you won't regret it. And I know too, how cool is it? You've started something that's probably really healthy for you to do as well to gain some perspective in the morning. So
yeah,
it's epic.
I usually record myself when I go on walks because when my body's moving, my brain's moving, and I decided maybe it could be useful to share some of these. So thank you for the shout out, man. Subtle plug.
Hey, it is, and it's just funny because like the way that I'm using this podcast platform is really similar to the way that you're using Mark's Minute. Is I love community, I love helping people share their story, and I love getting to hear and like understand where the retrospective viewpoint can take people in the future. And I hope everyone's encouraged by it. So I feel like we're onto something. This I think so. I think so. Well, okay, everyone. That's going to be it for our time together with Mark today. Thank you for tuning in to 1YL. Mark, thanks for being here. And as always, tune in for a new episode tomorrow. So until next time, we'll see you then.
See you.